Hello, everyone. It's Francis Widdowson here. I hope everyone's doing well. I just wanted to give everyone an update on what's going to be happening over the next week. It's a very busy week for people who have been following me. First of all, we're in Toronto on the 27th, which is on Thursday. I believe it starts at 5 p.m. And it's going to be a panel discussion with the Free Speech Union of Canada. And I've been involved with the Free Speech Union for several years in the UK. Toby Young is the leader of the Free Speech Union in the UK. They've done some great things in the UK, and the Free Speech Union now has just moved over to Canada, and they're trying to open up. They have opened up an office, but we're trying to gain some steam there. And so I've been to an event in Vancouver when I was visiting Victoria in the summertime. And I'm not sure if this is the first one that's been happening in Toronto, but it's the first one that I'm aware of. And it's going to be a panel discussion with 4 other people. Geoff Horsman, great guy from Wilfrid Laurier. He's also a board member of the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship. There is Bruce Pardy, who is a law professor from Queen's, who's written great material on the jurisprudence surrounding hate speech. There's a great article by his in C2C Journal. And then there is a Dr. Kulvinder Kaur Gill, who was raising criticisms about the lockdown. So it will be interesting to hear her views on free speech. Obviously, that's a big concern as to whether freedom of speech was stifled in the medical profession during that time. And then we have Jonathan Kay, the journalist. And I don't think I've met Jonathan Kay in person. I did a podcast with him on the unmarked graves shortly after my piece, Billy Remembers, in the American Conservative came out. But I'm really looking forward to meeting Jonathan Kay in person because I would like to take him to task for an interview that he did in October when he was in Kelowna. And in this interview, Kay seemed to be concerned about the people who are criticizing what's going on with respect to the Kamloops case in what he calls an insensitive way. That, we should have free speech on the Kamloops case, but it should be done in a sensitive way. That was seemed to be his approach. And when I heard him say that, after all that all my colleagues that I've been involved with on this issue over the last 4.5 years, we've been battling this out for 4.5 years now, enduring all sorts of abuse. And for him to say, sensitivity, that's what we require now, is sensitivity. This is absurd. This is absurd. We need far less sensitivity. It's sensitivity that is making it difficult for people to say what they believe to be true about this case, which, and I don't know exactly how it should be characterized. I know it's definitely a deception, whether it is a deception intentionally or it's just confirmation bias and a different conception of truth and misremembering and all these things. This isn't very clear, but some people go so far to call it a hoax. That's the word that you often hear used. And when I went to the University of Manitoba in September, I asked the question, or actually it was the claim. So I had the question on my whiteboard, grave error hoax, ? And then we had the mats laid out for the claim, the grave error at Kamloops is a hoax. And at the time, when I was doing the Spectrum Street epistemology on this claim, I was on the slightly disagree mat. And Michael Melanson, who's one of the members of my research group, he was there. I didn't know it was him at the time. And I was thinking, wow, this guy really knows a lot about the residential schools. But of course, we'd been interacting on it for the last 4 years. he moved me from the slightly disagree to the neutral mat, because things that Roseanne Casimir has been doing, the chief of the Kamloops band, making motions to the Assembly of First Nations and then to the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations about a mass grave and how this is a crime against humanity and so on. It's a little bit hard to believe that she would have made those motions without intentionally trying to deceive people. I don't know, but this is an open question. Anyway, Jonathan Kay takes issue with people asking whether this is a hoax. That this seems to be what he's criticizing me for in terms of what I was doing at the University of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg, because he mentioned my, what he calls contretemps at various university campuses. But my so-called contretemps, which are, when you have these kind of confrontations, I guess, they happen the way they do because of these intolerant cry bullies that are there. So I don't quite understand why he's taking issue with what it is that I'm doing. And if we look at what happened at the University of Winnipeg, where Daniel Page, my cameraman, feared for his life that day, and we were just discussing the claim residential school denialism is a barrier to reconciliation, because Negon Sinclair, who I used to call a name but I won't anymore, was making this claim on an event held with the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. And these cry bullies at the University of Winnipeg, especially Viv Ketchum, had to be constrained to stop them from attacking me, like this was Viv Ketchum, because I was just going to discuss the claim that was made by Negon Sinclair. So I don't quite understand how I could have been more sensitive at the University of Winnipeg. I guess I could not have gone. I might just not have gone. That's how to be sensitive. But in terms of everything that I did at the University of Winnipeg, I was completely sensitive, and I wasn't even doing that. So I really would like to hear from Jonathan Kay more on this subject of sensitivity and the kinds of tone policing that go on, because I think this is one of the most destructive forces against free speech in Canada, is the kind of idea that you have to say this in a certain kind of way, and if you don't, you should be disciplined for doing it. And anyway, so that's going to be a really interesting discussion about tone and how much should this factor in discussions about free speech. Anyway, what I'm going to be talking about besides that is my chapter in this book, The War on Science. And I believe this chapter is in about, it starts on page 203. I'm not sure if you can. And it's about the University of Lethbridge case. And for people who are unaware of what happened at the University of Lethbridge, I was invited there by Paul Viminetz, a philosophy professor. Paul Viminetz booked a room for me to talk on. It's in February 2023. It was posted on social media, my talk. A bunch of activists got really upset and started to lobby the administration to have me canceled. And then President Mon, the unbelievable panderer, said that although he found my views to be abhorrent, he had to allow my speech to go ahead because of the directive of the Alberta government of the Chicago principles, that you can't be shut down just because someone's offended by what you say. And so Paul Viminetz was saying to me, it could be canceled still. And I was going, there's no way it's going to be canceled. The president has put out this statement saying that it has to proceed because of the free speech policy. Anyway, the drum beating became louder and louder. And sure enough, President Mon cancel the talk. And I was amazed. Anyway, so I got on Facebook and I said, to the University of Lethbridge, I will be coming to give my talk in the atrium on this day. You will have to haul me away by security to stop me. Anyway, so that kind of put the fire up a number of people's behinds, and so all this kind of everyone got all riled up, and 700 people showed up at the University of Lethbridge. It was quite a sight to behold, and you can watch it on social media, the huge crowds. And I had a good conversation with an Aboriginal guy, but the woke decided that they were going to yell and scream and stop me from speaking, and it was all very theatrical. And I met Kathy Drake at that event, and we were ushered into a tunnel, a bunker, for our safety. Security was getting alarmed because of the numbers of people, and I wasn't afraid. I just thought it was theatrical, but you could have had a stampede or something like that. Anyway, we're suing Jonah Pickle, a student, and myself are suing the University of Lethbridge for violating our freedom of expression rights. That case is weaving its way through the procedures, because that was in 2023. It's going to court, we hope, in 2026. This is why the legal side is so horrible, is because it's all about just extending things down the line as you debate the various procedural questions. But we got great production. One of the good things, we got 250 emails from the University of Lethbridge, 15 incredibly woke professors who were making all sorts of ridiculous claims. The most interesting is Carolyn Hodes, who wrote a piece on this in the journal appropriately titled Feminist Asylum, because Hodes's views, her kind of approach is of a lunatic. She's a complete lunatic in gender studies, of course. But there's other ones too, a number of others. And the reason why they felt that my talk should be shut down is because I deny that the residential schools are genocidal, and I doubt the veracity of the unmarked graves. And I don't doubt the veracity of the unmarked graves. There are many unmarked graves in cemeteries that have been abandoned. What I doubt is the veracity of the allegations of clandestine burials. And this is the kind of slippage, Mott and Bailey kind of tactic where you have unmarked graves in cemeteries, clandestine burials, and there's a switching back and forth between those two claims. Anyway, this residential schools file and the unmarked graves in particular, and the Kamloops case specifically, this is one of the huge forms of censorship that are going on in the universities. Is you cannot discuss these claims openly and honestly, and sensitivity is not going to get it done. We need a reckoning. We need all these institutions that have been perpetuating these falsehoods over the last 4.5 years. They need to come out and correct the record, do so publicly, make sure that it's like huge headlines and, deception of the mask, there were no graves, but that's not happened. So a lot of people have just continued to believe that this is the case, especially these people that I've talked to at university campuses, the students. It'd be interesting to do a survey of students. And at Thompson Rivers University, which was the latest one that I went to with Dallas Brody, Tara Armstrong, Jim McMurtry, and Will Dove, many students there thought that, graves have been found at the Kamloops case. And no wonder, because their poor excuse for an academic institution, Thompson Rivers, has been saying that. Last time it said that was September 2024, and they've made no correction. So that institution should be directed to correct the record. Anyway, what happened at Thompson Rivers University was a complete triumph. It was incredible. I know people were there. I think Tokyo Speedboy, he was there doing some filming of the incident, and he can say that we had some great conversations there, and they tried to get us to leave, and they had sent me a trespass notice on October 15th. That's why I went there. I went there because I got the trespass notice, and I might not have gone there if I hadn't got that. And they gave me another one and said they wanted us to leave, and we said we're not going to leave, and they wanted us to go over into the basketball court. We said no, we're fine here. We're not blocking any entrances or so on. It's just in a kind of a courtyard area. Everyone can kind of gather, and Jim McMurtry did his street preacher kind of style, and I was the least, in fact, I was the least controversial person there because I was just with my billboard, What Remains, 215, just, asking students questions about why they believe the things that they did. And it was great. It was fantastic. So this is the way to do it. So in my talk at the Free Speech Union, I'm going to be talking about why indigenization is such a threat to academic freedom, which is one of the foundational, or it is the foundational principle of the university, is because it kind of makes the demands that Jonathan Kay was expressing, which is that it's upsetting it's not inclusive to make the claims such as residential schools aren't genocidal and the grave error at Kamloops is a hoax. If you make those kinds of claims, you make prized indigenization assets feel unsafe. They might even leave the university. They might go to another university that doesn't do that in these cases. But that's not how a university, an academic institution, should be run. It shouldn't be under threat that an Indigenous activist who can't hear views that are different from his or her own, they're going to leave. It's sort of blackmail. It's kind of a form of blackmail. Anyway, it's worked very well at Mount Royal University because that's what happened to me, and that's the other item that's on the agenda soon, as well as what's going to happen on December 1st at the BC Legislature on the Kamloops file, and I'm not sure if I'm authorized to say what's going to go down, but there's going to be something happening in Victoria. I'm going to be involved, and I'm happy to be involved because Kamloops case. That's all I care about now. Well, as the trans activism too, a little bit, but the Kamloops case, we must have a reckoning on the Kamloops case. But in addition to that, happening on December 1st, there's the situation on December 3rd. And December 3rd is when my case with Mount Royal University, my wrongful termination case, where arbitrator, the imperious and inept arbitrator, David Philip Jones, said that I could not be reinstated. Although I was wrongfully terminated, I couldn't be reinstated because of the friction that exists between me and some colleagues, and the two main claims that have been most well documented is the one that Mary Lee Mulholland is opposed to, which is that there are only two sexes. Mary Lee Mulholland, who's the chair of the Sociology and Anthropology Department, a very powerful member of the MRU community. She's opposed to saying that there's only two sexes. She thinks, I assume she thinks it's harassing and it makes trans people feel unsafe because you're saying, according to her, that trans people don't exist if you say there's only two sexes, and that should not be allowed. She said this during the arbitration hearing. And then there's Gabriel Weaselhead, who's the prized indigenization asset, who instigated the mobbing against me by encouraging an anonymous, supposedly student-led group to, mob me on social media. And I couldn't take it seriously because Gabrielle Weasel had said that She was loving and kind and trying to bring people together with humility and grace. That's what she was saying about herself. She was trying to get me fired. So I just kind of made fun of that. And that absolutely enraged the mob. Anyway, Gabrielle Lindstrom filed a harassment complaint against me. And one of the allegations is that I had, according to her, which was not true, said at an event, Indigenous science is not science. And Daniel Page, who's on this call here, who's the videographer, he did a couple of videos with me. The University of Regina Rumble and Mount Royal University murders academic freedom. Anyway, the Mount Royal University murders academic freedom, that goes over that whole episode where Lindstrom made that, now Weaselhead made that allegation. Then at a meeting in March 2021, people were saying that Indigenous scholars were leaving MRU because they felt unsafe. I knew that Gabrielle Weaselhead had left MRU because she felt unsafe. And one of the reasons why she felt unsafe was because I was saying that Indigenous science was not science. So I just asked the question, does saying that Indigenous science is not science, does that make Indigenous scholars feel unsafe? And that led to all these faculty members attacking me in this meeting. And then in the arbitration, this meeting was used against me to say that I just acted in this manner, which was just so beyond the pale that, they had to shut down the chat function and all sorts of things. So any normal process would see this kind of stuff going on and say, okay, that's it. This is obviously bad faith. Widdowson should be back in there because MRU is just trying to push her out to protect its indigenization brand. But that never happens. It's just like this endless abuse that I am subject to. And so on December 3rd, we go through another hoop in the process, and it's public. So I have 30 people that I have invited. You're going to be given Zoom links. Just a number of them are journalists, and they're going to see how this goes down. And I just can't wait, because the lawyer for MRU, Michael Ford, engages in histrionics. And so he's going to be doing this and making all sorts of outlandish claims about yours truly, about how I'm a menace and I'm a this and I'm a that, and it's not safe to have me around young minds and whatever else he's going to be saying. And my colleagues live in fear. This is one of the claims that was made, is that not at some point, I can't remember which harassment investigation I went through, where some of my Indigenous colleagues said they feared walking down the hallway where my office was because they might run into me, like they might have to pass me in the hallway. And like the fact that this is being taken seriously in an academic institution is a bit alarming, but I find it hard to take this seriously because people are taking it seriously, and that's the problem. Anyway, so that's all happening on December 3rd. And so we'll see what the Labour Board has to say about this. But I've heard that first of all, my union has botched the case so badly because they wanted me to lose, because they're pursuing grievances on behalf of Dirks, Weaselhead, and Watchman that I made them feel unsafe, and MRU didn't do enough to protect them from my making them feel unsafe. The union's pursuing those grievances on that side, and they want to win those grievances because they take this stuff seriously. And in order to win those grievances, I can't be found to have been wrongly accused of harassment. So they want me to be found to have engaged in harassment for things such as one tweet that satirized a cartoon, D.A. Dirks' cartoon about misgendering fatigue. So D.A. Dirks in a presentation had a cartoon where there's this person who says that they're wearing a backpack, and every time they get misgendered, it's like someone's putting a a brick in their backpack. And at the end of the day, they're misgendered so much that they've got all these bricks in their backpack and they have to lay down on the ground and they can't get up because their backpack is so heavy. They're so weighed down and they're being crushed. It's like they're being crushed by the gender binary. Anyway, this cartoon is just, anyway, my view was this needs satire. And so I said that something like this MRU colleague is hinting that they're suffering from misgendering fatigue. And saying that, supposedly, if you can believe this, investigator Jennifer Hawkins, who was paid for by MRU, found that this one tweet violated 3 policies: the human rights policy, the occupational health, the harassment policy, and the code of conduct, and 2 laws, the Alberta Human Rights Act and the Alberta Occupational Health and Safety Act. So that was one of the strikes against me, this one tweet. So that's my horrendous crime, against another colleague, which makes them feel that they can't walk in the halls because they might have to walk past me, Anyway, so I'm supposed to accept responsibility and show remorse for all these things that have happened. And it's like, never. Maybe if you hold a gun to my head, that'll happen. But before that, no way. And it's MRU. MRU should show remorse for putting me through 5 years of idiotic procedures, ruining my career because of, it has no management skills whatsoever. Never said a word about any of these things, just brought in the heavy-handed investigators to bring down the iron fist down on my head. But what I did is, when I got these findings of harassment against me for social media, which MRU said its policies did not cover personal social media accounts in December 2019, specifically changed its policies to go after me. And when I got a finding of harassment against me from on the Watchman it was the Dirks and the Lindstrom complaints, I filed 17 complaints against my colleagues, which these people became known as, according to Michael Ford, the Gang of 17. That's what Michael Ford, MRU's lawyer, called them in the arbitration. And this then resulted in a whole bunch of other consternation, because these faculty members were deeply hurt and harmed by being called the Gang of 17, because they were not involved in this concerted action to push Francis Widdowson out of Mount Royal University. It was just a completely random bunch of interactions. And then the union sent out an email expressing just, it was very, very sorry that it had, referred to the Gang of 17 in any way. On and on and on and on. It just is enough to make you, if you don't have a sense of humor, which is how I deal with it, with my sense of humor. But of course, that gets me into trouble too, because it shows in Michael Ford's words that I'm incorrigible. So I cannot be governed. I cannot be controlled, which is not true. When I'm given orders and actually told what my employer expects, which they never do because they don't even understand what they're talking about, and they can't apply it evenly. That's the biggest problem for them. They want to bring me under like the iron fist, but they don't want to bring all the other woke, people who are all going off half-cocked all the time on social media. They don't want to bring them under the iron fist. So you got to be consistent, and of course, wokeism is not consistent. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, so that's all happening on the 3rd. But in terms of the Free Speech Union, the final thing, besides how indigenization destroys academic values, because it's a prescribed doctrine and it insists that you must be deferential to Indigenous ways of knowing, even if it results in all these falsehoods, such as the false claim about the unmarked graves. It has this destructive, and I've had the 6 universities that I've seen this up close and personal, which I say are in the university's Hall of Shame, which are Mount Royal, of course, University of Lethbridge, which I talked about in this piece in The War on Science. University of Regina, which, as I mentioned, Daniel and I did this documentary on the University of Regina Rumble. Then there was Thompson Rivers University, and then University of Manitoba, because University of Manitoba wanted to charge the Society for Academic Freedom and Scholarship between $2,000 and $5,000 for security costs. And we said, piss off, University of Manitoba. We're coming in with the spectrum street epistemology, which was actually a wonderful session once we outlasted the cry bullies with their drums. And then we had the elite Hall of Shame, which was the University of Winnipeg. Anyway, all of those universities, the reason why they are the way they are in these instances is because of indigenization. That's what indigenization does, is it prevents the academic values and the scholarly kinds of approaches, which would be able to have debates on questions such as whether the residential schools are genocidal or not. So we had J.R. Miller, who died a few months ago. He was the most well-known scholar on the residential schools. He said they weren't, because he said assimilation is not genocide. It's not trying to destroy. It's trying to make that group a part of the wider society. Have myself and all the contributors to Grave Error and the sequel, which is coming out on November 27th as well. It's called Dead Wrong. We all argue it's not genocidal. And then, of course, the unmarked graves. We need to be able to discuss the Kamloops case. And indigenization prevents that from happening. And that's one of the reasons why all these people believe that there's these clandestine burials, because in the universities, you cannot discuss that issue. It's not possible. Otherwise, you will have a target put on you, and your work environment will be poisoned, and you will be pushed out of the university. So we have to address this serious censorious attitude that exists in the universities. And how you do that is with the spectrum street epistemology. And that breaks the self-censorship, because you can actually have the claims being discussed, which is not happening. And you can't get all that deep into the claims with spectrum street epistemology, but you can at least have people seeing that it's okay to talk about these things. And if the government of Alberta really wants to do something about the universities, then we should have an office set up about how to bring these critical thinking exercises to the universities. If Daniel Smith is thinking, as to why it's so difficult to pass this legislation about trans activism, about the women and stopping men who believe they're women from participating in women's sports, for example. You need to have discussions in the universities, but all the people who are writing about this in the universities are activists, and they intimidate everyone who tries to challenge them. And my colleague Sinclair McRae is currently trying to publish an article critical of these activist positions, and argues there's perfectly rational reason for excluding men who identify as women from female sports. But if we brought in the spectrum street epistemology, we could bring in Peter Boghossian, we could have Sinclair McRae and myself and a bunch of other people talking about all the bills that the Alberta government is trying to put forward, and we could have some change that would happen in the culture of the universities, and that's a serious problem. And it's not going to work with Chicago principles type of legal types of frameworks, because, as we saw, the government did nothing. When the University of Lethbridge canceled me, nothing happened. And they're more emboldened than ever, and they're taking it to court, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of public funds on fighting this in the courts, as opposed to what happened at University of Lethbridge was a serious breakdown of an academic institution, because it meant that you cannot discuss the unmarked graves, whether the residential schools are genocidal. They say you can't discuss that at the University of Lethbridge. That's their position, and that shouldn't happen. So I really think that this kind of critical thinking exercise is something that can be brought to the universities, but all I need is some backing, because the universities are not going to let. Well, I'm going to go in there anyway, but it creates a furor when I go into universities because the culture is so bad. But if I got some backing from some institution, then it would be a lot easier for me. So that's something that I think the Alberta government should think about. They should have a public inquiry into universities because, as I mentioned, we got the University of Lethbridge and Mount Royal, but there's also been problems happening at the University of Calgary, problems happening at the University of Alberta. It's not just in those, Mount Royal, the Universities Hall of Shame universities. It's in the other universities as well. So, universities are incredibly important institutions because they allow for knowledge to be disseminated. They train professionals, and they are a bulwark against authoritarianism. And if we lose our universities, then our society will be greatly diminished. So I'm really looking forward to the next 6 months, trying to bring spectrum street epistemology to campuses. I think we're going to do a lot in BC because Dallas Brody wants to do this, which is great. And the next two institutions on our list are University of the Fraser Valley. That's in Abbotsford. That's where Sarah Bollier is a professor. And she's the GPR operator for the Kamloops case. She's gone dark. She won't answer any questions. And so we want to start, asking the questions at University of Fraser Valley. Second one is Simon Fraser University, which has terrible archaeology department there, which is behind a lot of the deception that is going on. And they have been involved with the Kamloops band for a number of decades, and they're shielding. They're under a gag order from the Kamloops band not to discuss the Kamloops case. How on earth does that happen? How does a publicly funded institution, how come the Kamloops Indian Band has control over the research and the discussions that occur at a publicly funded academic institution? That's the question. Anyway, that's the plan for the spring, is to do those two institutions. But I'd love to do ones in Alberta even more, because that's where I live, and I would like to reshape these universities. But BC seems to be the province which is the most on life support in terms of being able to deal with the Aboriginal industry, which has got its tentacles into all aspects of British Columbia life. Anyway, I'm going to take a look at the chat here. So I haven't been following it, but I'm just going to look. I think I saw Daniel say that the president of the University of Winnipeg has been removed, or he resigned. Yep, I agree about the cultural genocide. I don't. That word doesn't make any sense. The cultural genocide. There's no such thing as cultural genocide. Genocide is about exterminating the genes of a group. And they say that, one of the things they bring up about the residential schools is the forcible transfer, which was during the Holocaust. A bunch of German families adopted, blonde-haired Jewish children, took them away from that community and put them in for German parents who didn't have children. That's what they're talking about. That's not what was going on with the residential schools. They went back for the summers and Christmas and so on. They were just educating them. They weren't forcibly transferring them. Anyway, so Daniel, I'm very curious about this Todd Mondor. He was removed. Any intel about why he was removed? Peter Miller, classics professor. said, it's the most unexpected, Peter Biker saying, it's the most unexpected event of the year, said Peter Miller, classics professor and president. This guy, Peter J. Miller, I'm seriously considering suing him and the Faculty Association, because they said that a residential school denialist was on campus spreading lies and that this should be combated. And then all these gangsters showed up with combat fatigues. So what are the lies, Peter J. Miller? What were the lies that this residential school denialist was spreading on campus? That's false. And that is very damaging to my reputation. It's my understanding that that's defamation. So maybe that should be sorted out. Is this the legal side? I really don't like the legal side. But you do get good production. You get good emails. Right relationship. Yeah, I know that was Wild and Salty Healing Company says, on the matter of sensitivity, a practice of right relationship. All that stuff. It's just terrible. Yeah, right audience. Yeah, so, like it's like going into a church and telling people that God doesn't exist. Like I think that's insensitive to do that. If you're an atheist, which I am, I don't disrupt people in their religious activities. What I object to is the religious activities being brought into non-religious places. So the sacred fire at police ceremonies and National Center for Truth and Reconciliation and the prayers at universities and smudging going on. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to Wild and Salty Healing Company to chat further. People can usually contact me through Facebook, but my email is just last name, first name. So just one word at gmail.com if you want to contact me. Yeah. No, the Dead Wrong, the sequel to Grave Error, that's going to be a good one. I've got 2 chapters in there. One on the Powell River case, What Remains, that documentary was done on, but I have more kinds of the scholarly backing for that. And then residential school denialism, the accusations of residential school denialism made by Sean Carlton, Negon Sinclair, Travis Hay, who is a professor at Mount Royal, who I went to one of his events a couple months ago. He was castigating me. It was like it was a serious attack that he mounted against me. And he vaguely referred to that article. Travis Hay, the things that I've done, which are so awful, is I sent an email to all the members of the Indigenous Studies Department asking them to participate in a Indigenous Science is Not Science discussion. So that was terrible, evidently. And I called, not that I do this anymore, but I called Sean Carlton Uber Clown, and I called Negon Sinclair Brainless II. And the reason why I called Negon Sinclair Brainless, and I used to do that, the reason I called him that is because I referred to Murray Sinclair as Brainless I. And this was just a bridge too far. Anyway, that was seen as being seriously inappropriate when, I kind of saw it as funny. Like, I don't do that anymore because I'm trying to enter into this with a bit of seriousness. But sometimes I get so tired of having all these people trying to criminalize my speech and go after me that I just kind of make fun of them, sometimes. I just can't, but I'm trying not to do that anymore. So, but sometimes it becomes too much. It becomes too much for me. Because it's hard to take seriously sometimes. Like just the way people, and it's the cry bullying. That's what I find is so difficult is that, people are seriously, like you do something that is upsetting to them. And I do, like this one woman who approached me at the University of Manitoba. She said, because I said that, Negon Sinclair wasn't reading properly, and perhaps this is because he comes from an oral culture. She said that was very upsetting for her as an Aboriginal person to hear me say that, because it's like I'm I'm sort of saying this about all Aboriginal people. And I don't mean that to be about all. I was doing that to dig at Niigaan. Like I was making fun of Niigaan. I didn't mean to make fun of all Aboriginal people, but she said that's how she saw it. And I said, oh yeah, I can see that. I can see how you would see that. And I didn't mean, that wasn't what I meant. So I'm sorry that you felt that way. And I'll try to, restrain myself from such comments. But Sean Carlton and Niigaan Sinclair, they are serious bad actors. And Niigaan is the most incoherent person I have ever heard speak. It just, like the clips that I put of him, you could not understand anything, any of his arguments he's talking about. He was saying something, the last one I posted was, he was talking about a mass, that it's okay to call it a mass grave because a mass grave can also mean forced marriages and a bunch of other things. Like a mass grave is not, because it's cultural death. A mass grave is when you put a number of bodies together in one grave. I think it has to be more than two, and it shows that there's some foul play that's happened, and probably genocide. Genocide is often an indication of genocide. That's why we're concerned about mass graves, and it's got nothing to do with forced marriages or other things that he's talking. You can't speak your language, not being able, like forcing people not to speak their language. We'll call that a mass grave now, or something. Like I don't even know how to analyze these things. Anyway, this is Niigaan Sinclair. Like he's just anyway. Okay, what else? Any intel on Todd Mondor? Oh, he's at the Board of Regents statement. Okay, I'll have to look at that up. That's amazing. I wonder if it's to do with the University of Winnipeg situation. What do you think, Daniel? Do you think it has to do with the university? What happened at the University of Winnipeg? That would be great if that were the case, because he should. Well, he's responsible for what he. Yeah. What's her face? Pavla Radia. That's the provost sent out this email communications toolkit saying that no one would block us from coming on campus, and that our safety would be protected. That's what this provost said. But of course, that was under authorization of the president. So what happened? What went down at the University of Winnipeg? That's a national embarrassment for that institution. And what we're trying to figure out right now is, because we have freedom of information requests at the Winnipeg Police, the university security guy told us that, and it was also in the media, that they had called the police, that the university had called the police. And if that's the case and the police did not come, that's a huge, misstep by the police. But it's also possible that the university just said that they called the police and they didn't call the police, which I think is more probable. Because, like, why wouldn't the police come if the university called them? I understand why they don't come when ordinary citizens call them, which is kind of bizarre in its own right. But we're getting that information, so we'll be able to make that determination soon. But there's still a lot of unfinished business, serious unfinished business at the University of Winnipeg, because that what happened there, it is just not even comparable to any other institution, because on all the other institutions, it follows a similar playbook, which is university tries to get you to leave, you don't leave, they sit back and watch. Then all the drums come out and all the toddlers have their tantrums, and then you just outlast their tantrums, and then you go ahead and do what you were planning on doing anyway. And it generally works really well, because all it requires is patience. So you have to be patient and following through on what you're trying to do. It's super nanny. As I mentioned, it's the philosophy of super nanny. is that Super Nanny says, you got to get the naughty spots. So you go, and then if the toddler's having a tantrum, you put the toddler on the naughty spot. The toddler gets off the naughty spot. You put the toddler back on, and you just keep on putting the toddler back on the naughty spot until the toddler gets tired and doesn't really like doing that anymore. And so that's what you do with the street epistemology discussions. You just keep on asking the questions, discussing the claims, asking for evidence, and no matter what you get, rattles shaked in your face, pop dumped on your head, people screaming in your face, telling you that you're a hick, like Melissa Robinson did, etc., that I'm a monster and a bully, have my head hit with a feather by Grandma Shingoose, etc. Like, who cares? That doesn't bother me. Now, the gangsters and the violence, that was frightening, and we can't have that. That's a whole. See, when Super Nanny has the toddlers that start physically attacking her in a very, very, a very, very organized way, I can't. I've seen some episodes like that. It gets a little bit more difficult. You have to kind of figure. You need security. You need police. You need all these kinds of things. Yeah, I saw that ruling, the Hans McCarthy. Yeah, so I think that's a great step. That's what Dan Sparkling Eyes, who I did an interview with, he was saying he thinks that's one of the ways of addressing some of the problems in Aboriginal communities is the having openness and transparency. And so that's one of the big problems is the secrecy that exists. And so this will address some things. It still doesn't get at some of the major issues, in my view, which are you have communities where they have no economic base and no ability to participate in the economy and society. And I don't know how to deal with those like those are the most marginalized, the people that are suffering the most. We need to think about that. And one way you can do that is have kind of send people in who deal with people almost on a one-on-one basis. Try to really bring in educators, healthcare workers, talk with the community, the people who are functional, about how to have a developmental strategy for people. The communities need to they can't go on forever. They're not set up to enable human beings to thrive. But the problem is that it's not like your typical community, which you see this when a resource has been used up, and you have what's called ghost towns, that people just go somewhere else. It's going to be really hard for those people to go somewhere else. It's going to be a serious, tragic situation. So, but the fetal alcohol syndrome problem, that's a big one. And that has to be addressed. It must be addressed. And you need to go in there and have discussions with people about what this is doing to the population and how this needs to end. But again, if you have people living in such misery, that's obviously they're just trying to get by. They're not going to be thinking about the future. But there's all these very, very serious problems, which of course are being totally avoided by all these running GPR machines over fields and all these neo-tribal elites who are all revitalizing Aboriginal languages, which no one speaks, and they're written in scripts that no one can pronounce. And this is just not really what is required. Anyway, okay, well, I think I've covered everything that's happening. I hope some people are going to be in Toronto. It's going to be great. I look forward to my discussions with Jonathan Kay, because I really want to have some. I want to kind of figure out what he's talking about. If you're in Victoria, maybe I'll see you in Victoria on December 1st. And then we're going to Abbotsford in the spring, as well as Vancouver, Fraser Valley, and University of Fraser Valley and Simon Fraser University. Anyway, okay, well, thanks a lot for joining me. And I'll give you an update on terms of what's happening in Toronto. Thanks very much. Great seeing everyone.